Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this AAAS 2021 workshop on unique strategies for teaching and learning about science and technology policy. If you have any questions, you should, or comments, uh, you should put those in the Slido app. Uh, we will put that in chat so everybody can see it. So just a brief introduction about myself. I direct the Science and Technology Policy Academy, and also I'm an independent consultant. I used to work for Capitol Hill at the Congressional Research Service, at the White House during the first 3 years of the Obama administration, as Executive Director of the President's Council on Advisors in Science and Technology. And the reason I'm interested in this session is because my career has very much been dedicated to encouraging scientists, engineers to use policy analysis in their communication. So not just to base it on their opinion, but actually to do the analysis behind the policy. So with that, you can have, the content for like all these different things that I have in this graphic. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Science Technology Policy Academy that I operate, where anybody can sign up for virtual classes. The next one we have is coming up is on program evaluation, policy analysis, policy analytical methods. And almost everybody who is one of our speakers today has taken one or the other of these classes or is in the midst of these classes. Please take a look at that if you get a chance. I will put the website in draft, and we offer free monthly webinars. Our last webinar, for example, was on how to prepare a federal resume. So we're very orientated toward different careers. So our plan for today is to hear from 3 speakers. Amanda, Bernat, and Rachel, and you'll hear more about them as we go along. And then the other aspect of it is that we want to involve all of you. So if you have a program that you would like to talk about, let people know about, please indicate that in chat or in Slido so that people can ask you questions about it. And we'd also appreciate you posting questions as we go along for any of the speakers. We'll address those at the end of this session. So with that, I'd like to introduce Joan Centrella, who is the co-coordinator of this workshop and is director of the Bridge Science and Technology Policy Policy Leadership and Communications Initiative at West Virginia University. She was at NASA for many years, and so has been involved from that side in science technology. So with that, I'll turn over to Joan to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Debbie. Debbie mentioned that we've all taken advantage of the courses, and we've taken advantage of her courses in a very special way at West Virginia University. She's a consultant working with us, developing our initiative, and we've really put her ideas to work in terms of taking the research we have. We're at R1 University with a public good mission land grant, and over the past year, we've been working to bring the science that we do into the public sphere. And it's all been based, really, it's been the engine has been the way Debbie approaches policy analysis. So I give her many unqualified hurrahs for this, and thank her very much. I have the pleasure of introducing Amanda Hurley. She's our first speaker. Amanda received her PhD in molecular biology from Princeton in 2017. Currently, she is a USDA postdoctoral fellow with Dr. Joe Handelsman at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was formerly an eLife ambassador and currently is professional development chair for her local National Science Policy Network chapter, Catalyst for Science Policy. Amanda also sits on the board of directors for the early career research nonprofit group, Future of Research, where she advocates for labor issues and postdoc benefits. Thank you, Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you about a new course developed at UW-Madison that studies the intersection of law and forensic science. And throughout the talk, I'll ask a few questions that I encourage everyone to answer in the chat. For example, let's start off with something fun. I want to hear about your favorite crime show. So personally, I've been loving the Unsolved Mysteries revamp on Netflix. So let me know what you're watching in the chat. Okay, so as an overview this morning, I want to discuss the motivation for the course development. Then I'll describe course overview and structure. And then I'll wrap up with opportunities for people in STEM to branch out beyond their specific training. So I'll start with two examples that exemplify the two sides of forensic science. Christine Mirzayan is a success story in forensic science. Actually, it started with a really tragic event. Christine was a science policy fellow in DC who was murdered on her way home in 1998. And you may have heard of the Christine Mirzayan Science Policy Fellowship at the National Academies, which was created in her honor. So the case went cold, and after 2 decades comparing DNA profiles of relatives to DNA evidence found at the scene, in a field called forensic genealogy, authorities caught her killer 20 years later. So DNA evidence is an amazing technology, and it's a gold standard. In fact, it's so amazing that DNA evidence is actually exonerating prisoners who were put in jail by what we have come to learn are relatively inaccurate forensic science fields. In fact, 25% of exonerations are cases with flawed forensic science. So I want to pause here and ask the audience, what could make a forensic science flawed or questionable? For example, comparing hair samples. And we'll come back to that question later, so feel free to fill up the chat. So the DNA revolution has put all forensic science under a spotlight, and lots of people are calling for reform. UW-Madison has become a hub of some sorts in this issue, especially with the leadership of these two people. And on the left is my postdoctoral mentor, Dr. Joe Handelsman, and former Deputy Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And she helped write a report on forensic science reform for President Obama. And she's joined by Professor Keith Finley, a lawyer here in Madison, who is also directing the Wisconsin Innocence Project. And together, they developed a unique course for law students and science students to study issues of how forensic science is used in the courtroom. And here on the bottom, I've included Catalyst for Science Policy in this cycle, which is a science policy group for graduate students and postdocs. And we took on forensic science reform as an issue, for which we planned events like public panels. We hosted a Making a Murderer documentary and discussion. And once we built some of that expertise, my colleagues in CASP even wrote a memo for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance on forensic science reform options for Wisconsin. And this was sort of drumming up community interest on the subject and feeding into the circle. Next slide, please. So the course itself is housed in both plant pathology, where Joe works, and the law school, where Keith works. It's, like I said before, half law students and half undergraduate and grad STEM students. And it's 3 credits. And the main structure involves guest lectures from experts in forensic sciences to learn about the validity and history of fields like fingerprint evidence, I'm showing here, bite mark evidence, and on the right is ballistics, which is a pattern matching field looking at bullets. Okay, so here I'm going to go back to my previous question. What would make a forensic science unreliable? And I'll give you the answers. Number 1 is some cognitive bias. You may receive the evidence from a detective saying, this is my main subject. That could influence how you look at some of the patterns. Experts tend to overstate their confidence. They say this evidence is from the suspect to the exclusion of all others, or they'll say it's the suspect's, the chances are 1 in 10,000, which is sort of a made up number. And I want to mention that it's not impossible that a reference database for hair be developed, or to institute efforts that blind case file details from the forensic scientists. And these would just make forensic science more reliable, and that's the whole point of the reform movement. So anyway, back to the class. Finally, the course integrates some experiential learning through doing in the form of mock trials. The science students take the stand as expert witnesses in a crime featuring a particular forensic science, and then the law students examine and cross-examine them as prosecutors or the defense. Next slide. And I'm here talking to you today about this is because I was in the inaugural semester. And now I study bacteria and soil, not forensic science, obviously, but I am a true crime nerd, and I'm passionate about how science so acutely influences society in the criminal justice system. And yes, as the slide would suggest, I also took the stand as an expert witness in mixed DNA samples. And I was grilled by the lawyers. We also, to prepare for the mock trial, went to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory and met with crime lab scientists. We went over the case files, we took a tour, and then the crime lab scientists came to the mock trial. It was this sort of really nice relationship that we built. It was certainly nerve-wracking because I wanted to get the DNA science right, and also had to diplomatically address some of these failings around other forensic science fields, but it was a really genuine action of their support, and it made an impact on me. So one lesson, maybe not outlined explicitly in the syllabus from the course, but is obviously an intent in a course something like this that my classmates and I definitely learned, is the power of relationship building and what you can learn from people outside your field and may be able to provide a new perspective in return. Okay, next slide. So finally, how does this course impact its students? What are the outcomes? So the course has only been taught for 2 semesters, but 4 students have already been inspired to obtain internships at the Center for Integrity in Forensic Science, which is a nonprofit that aims to improve the reliability and safety in criminal prosecutions through strengthening the forensic sciences. And one student shared with me that they are directly using the lessons they learned in class in some Wisconsin Innocence Project cases, which is a pretty incredible outcome for a course. Next slide, please. And from this talk, I hope you can appreciate how people moving beyond their fields of expertise can be eye-opening and a rewarding experience. Over time, you build knowledge in a new space, and anyone can make the leap. On the professor level, you could start your own unique cross-sectional course on a topic that interests you. As a note, the guest lecture model is a great way for entry into a new field, and it's amenable to virtual learning. On the graduate student or postdoc level, you could participate in classes outside your field, get professors from different departments together for a panel to discuss a shared interest. You could join a national or local science policy organization for early career researchers. If you need advice, come talk to me. And finally, I'll put a plug for a memo writing workshop. You could build some of that knowledge, submit a memo to JSPG, and that's a great way to build some credibility in a field outside of your specific training. And with that, I am so grateful for Debbie for inviting me here to speak, and I'll take any questions in the chat, or you can contact me afterwards. My email address and Twitter are on the next slide, so feel free to reach out. Thanks.
I wanted to mention that just because we have some confusion. So we have an internal chat here. It turns out that chat does not connect with all of our audience. So if you want to make comments of any kind or ask questions, you need to put them in Slido. So a number of you are doing it now, but sorry for the confusion. We did not realize this ourselves until the session started. And another sort of reminder, if you were not at the beginning, is that the other thing we're looking for is for people to put into Slido any other programs that you are aware of out there that you run or that you know about that are non-traditional ways about learning about science and technology policy. So with that, we'll go to Joan to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Amanda. That was just great. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Bernat Navarro. He's our next speaker. Bernat is a 4th year PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins, studying pancreatic cancer. He is the former Eastern Hub co-chair of the National Science Policy network. Outside of his work, he is also the VP of the Johns Hopkins Science Policy Group, which is a student-led policy group that aims to engage early career scientists in science policy, advocacy, and communication. As part of this group, he has advocated for biomedical research on Capitol Hill, and he has also coordinated workshops and career panels to get graduate students involved in science policy. Bernat is interested in environmental and health policy. Thank you, Bernat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And hi, everyone. So I'll be talking about some of the unique experiences that I've had learning about science policy and how can you access those opportunities or help create similar ones at your institutions. And so in the next slide, I'll be talking a little bit more about the National Science Policy Network and how NSPN is filling that gap that we observe that our institutions not providing this science and technology policy training. And so NSPN was established 2.5 years ago. And the main mission of NSPN is to catalyze the engagement of early career scientists and engineers in policymaking by training the next generation of leaders, fostering community, as well as empowering advocates for the inclusion of science in policy. And so some of the benefits of being an NSPN member is not just you get access to the online community, but you also get access to resources and training opportunities. And you're eligible to apply for some grants that can, bring you to science policy conferences, as well as sponsor competitions. And if you would want to be a leader of NSPN, you're also able to do that. And so in the next slide, I'm going to start talking a little bit about some of the ways that we're currently developing these educational series. And so this aims to be an opportunity for all of our members to learn about science policy, what science policy is, how to become a scientist or engineer engaged in public policy, and how to practice the skills that are necessary to be an effective policy actor. And so ideally, this is going to have multiple entry points that are going to be based on your previous experience. So if you haven't encountered science policy, you will be able to start in the more basic introduction class on science and technology policy. And then we will have different levels. And so for level 2, we have already developed the NSPN educational modules. And for level 4, I'll be talking about Disciple Scholars Bootcamp and Residency, which is a current program by its own, but hopefully will be integrated in this larger effort. So if you go to the next slide, I'll be talking about these educational modules that potentially will be used for that second level class. And so these are open access resources that were generated by the Graduate Education Committee at NSPN. And the main goal was for this to be a resource for students that either haven't had any experience in science policy or just want other resources to learn more about what science policy is. And so the curriculum that we developed goes from just the definition of what science policy is, but covers topics like how does government work, how to communicate science to the public as well as policymakers, the economics of science policy. And so as you'll see, there are some infographics to make it easier to learn about these issues. And this curriculum also includes some engagement activities that you can do. So not just you're learning about this content, but you're thinking about the ways that you can integrate all of these in potentially an idea that you may have or an advocacy event that you want to create. And so so that is an initial open access modules that we have. But in the next slide, I'll be now talking about Disciple Scholars Program. And so this is a unique program that started just last year in the summer, and it consists in two main areas: the bootcamp, which is required class, and the residency. And so for the bootcamp, it is a 6-week intensive course that the main goal is to learn and to improve the soft skills that you may need to be successful in science policy careers. And so the main three ways that this establishes, but first, understanding where your weaknesses and your strengths are in terms of these skills. Second, knowing how to effectively communicate science, not just the scientists, but the public and policymakers. And third, to have a knowledge on how government works, as well as how politics can influence policy. And so what made this a unique experience is that we're just a cohort of 12 to 13 people that, you know, we're early career scientists, we're passionate about science policy, and you really have a network that you feel comfortable, you know, doing this learning together. Again, this was a very more experimental learning about where our skills are and how to improve them. So yeah, so this was a great 6-week bootcamp program, but it has a potential second part, which is a part-time remote fellowship. And so I'm currently doing mine at the Union of Concerned Scientists. But I'll be talking a little bit more in a couple of slides from now. So now I wanted to bring some of these soft skills issues back. So in the next slide, I have a question for everyone to kind of know where you are in terms of these soft skills. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that I would like to know, and we actually practice this in our class, was to just summarize your research, whatever you do, in just one sentence or two. Try to avoid any jargon, try to be as clear and as concise as you can, as if you're talking to either me, that I may not know anything about your science, or someone that just hasn't had, you know, hasn't taken a science class for years. And try to think about some of the barriers that you're facing while writing this. What are you struggling with? You know, what are some of the challenges that you have when you're trying to, you know, summarize your research in a way that is understandable for everyone? And so I would like to know some of that, and if you can tell me about your research, that would be great as well. So feel free to put that in the Slido, and we can continue, and I'll talk a little bit about the residency part of the program. So during the bootcamp, we do a variety of things. So we not just did the learning, we learned how to write a policy memo, actually ended up submitting my policy memo as well. But during some of the classes, we have some science policy organizations that come and talk to us about the work that they do. And there's a process of matching between fellows and the actual host organizations. And so after we've matched, we actually learn how to write a project proposal, which is very different from the typical scientific writing. These are very concise, 1 to 2 pagers on what you hope to achieve. And after that, in our graduation from the bootcamp, we start this fellowship. So most of us have already been in our fellowship for 3 to 4 months. And I think it's been an amazing experience. It's also remote. And you know, you get to also apply these skills that we've been fostering and improving during the bootcamp in our in the fellowship. Another important thing that I wanted to mention is that, you know, this is an opportunity to get the training, but a lot of these scholars will become then the people who train the next cohort of SciPol scholars. So we're not just teaching people, but making them become leaders and teachers for next cohort of SciPol scholars. And so I just wanted to end on the next slide that NSPN is full of resources and programs. These are just some of the examples, but there are a lot of committees that are working on different projects. There are webinars and different resources that happen regularly, especially now that everything is virtual. I wanted to say that the next SciPol Scholars deadline is just in a few days, but don't worry, because we're hoping to have those twice a year. And if you have any questions, please email me. I'm happy to contact you, help you figure out where to go. And if you're interested in joining NSPN, also feel free to email me. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Now ready for our next speaker. Joan?
Oops. Okay. Thank you very much, Bernat. That was great. Our next speaker is Rachel Owen. Dr. Rachel Owen is the co-founder of the Missouri Science and Technology, or MOST, Policy Initiative, which she co-founded in 2016. And since 2019, June 2019, she has served as its executive director. She received her PhD at the University of Missouri School of Natural Resources, where she was researching the impact of a changing climate on wetland ecosystems and landowner perceptions of climate and agricultural threats in the Great Plains. Dr. Owen is passionate about state-level science policy efforts and enjoys helping other states grow and launch their programs. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Joan. Well, I am really excited to be here today, and I am going to focus on state-level science policy fellowships as not just a way to launch a career into science policy, but also as a way to add capacity to state governments and their ability to inform their policymaking with evidence. So I am just going to give a brief overview here at the beginning of sort of how all states come in different shapes and sizes when it comes to their state governments. And so really easy interactive question. If you could just post which state you're from in the chat, I would love to bring in some information about your state as we go. If you have any fun facts about your state government too, feel free to share them. For instance, in Missouri, where I'm from, our lieutenant governor and our governor are elected separately. And so we have the possibility of having a governor and lieutenant governor from two different parties, which would make for some really interesting dynamics at the state level. So as you post those, first I'll talk about state legislatures. Oh, sorry, Debbie, could you go back to the last slide? I was slow. So there were several grad students who worked on a paper that was posted in JSPG this last year that talked about the different makeup of state legislatures. So this is the legislative branch. And you can see here, there's a lot of different types. So a full-time legislature would be one that they are getting paid to be there full-time. They don't necessarily meet all year round, but the legislators don't have other jobs. They're typically there, they're well-staffed and doing a lot of work. The hybrid legislatures can look a lot of different ways. Typically, those legislators respond that they spend about 2/3 of their time every year working as a legislator, but they don't get paid enough to be doing that full time, so they often still have part-time jobs. And then here in red are the true part-time legislatures, where those lawmakers are spending less than half of their time every year focused on their jobs as a legislator, and they typically have low pay and thus they're low staffed at the Capitol. And so each of these different legislatures is going to have unique needs and unique challenges as they think about incorporating science into the policymaking process. The executive branch of states have even more variability in who makes up the governor's cabinet, the authority that the executive branch has, the agencies, different boards and commissions, the budgets that they have at their state, the balanced budget rules that they have at their state, political turnover, term limits, and all of these different variables are going to affect how a state can keep scientific information and knowledge within their state government and where a fellow might be able to add in information. Something in particular that happens at a lot of times at the state level is that they often lack institutional knowledge, in large part due to term limits or political turnover. And we recently worked on a study that showed that, well, we compiled this, we didn't actually do the experiment, but oftentimes when you have term limits, especially in the legislature, that leads to lawmakers to rely heavily on lobbyists, state agencies, and then the staff. And oftentimes that staff is a partisan staff that have worked in member offices, and states don't necessarily always have great nonpartisan staff resources to carry over knowledge from year to year. And so some of the solutions that have been cited to overcome some of this loss of institutional knowledge at the state level would be to increase the nonpartisan staff capacity. So increase those people at the Capitol who are able to inform lawmakers, do research, and bring science into the conversations. But oftentimes those people have legal backgrounds, and so they may not be overly prepared to bring scientific information into the conversations. And then also improving data management and creating onboarding procedures can also help overcome these, but all of those really require scientific minds in the room. And so there's been a movement in the past, I would say 5 years is really when it started to take off. California, of course, started their program about a decade ago now. But to develop state level science technology policy fellowship programs. And not only do these programs serve as a way for scientists to launch into a science policy career and to learn about science policy, but they also provide a unique opportunity for scientists to really be able to teach and build scientific capacity within state governments. Oh, so this slide, sorry, this slide is a little bit off with the formatting. So I'll go through this quick. Currently, we have 8 states that have active state level science policy fellowship programs. The green states here plus Texas. Texas launched their program after this map was created. And then we also have several states across the country that are working on developing programs, and those are the states listed in purple. If you are in a state that does not have any colors on it right now and are interested in starting a program in your state, please feel free to reach out. We would love to have conversations about what that might look like. And also Debbie and I have worked with a lot of new states to help them get this off the ground and kind of navigate this. So we'd love to bring you into this cohort of states. But these states, all of the state programs look different. So each of these was started on the state level within their state. Some of the states have only executive branch fellowships, some have executive and legislative branch fellowships, and others place their fellows in NGOs. Among these states, there's also there's full-time fellowships that are available only if you are post-PhD or have a terminal degree. And there's also fellowships that are only available for 12 weeks to students who are currently enrolled at academic institutions in their state, such as Texas and Virginia. But the point I think I really want to make with that is just that each of those states developed their programs so that it fit the needs of their state. So in Missouri, for instance, we developed our program to not only train fellows into understanding the science policy world, but our legislators gave us very specific kind of feedback on when they need scientific information. And it's when they're having a committee hearing or before they start drafting a bill. And so we really focus with our fellows on trying to get them scientific information at those 2 periods of time, because we know that that's when they most need that information. And we also give it to them in a format that they've asked us for. And so we call our white papers science notes, because that's a term that really resonates with our state lawmakers. And so these state level programs are really customized to work best at the state level. And I'll just wrap up by saying there are several states that have policy fellowship applications open right now. California's are open until March 1st. Here in Missouri, ours are open until March 15th. Idaho has applications open for their second cohort now until February 28th. In North Carolina, they're accepting applications for their second cohort due on March 8th. And then finally, Virginia, they are also accepting fellowship applications. They have a 12-week fellowship, and theirs, you have to be enrolled at a university in Virginia in order to apply, and the date that they're due varies. But if you're interested in any of these programs, I've put the Twitter handles on here and the main contact for those programs, so that way you can get in touch. Also happy to connect you with anybody if you're interested in these programs. And I will go ahead and wrap up. And again, I'm happy to answer questions about state level science policy and any career development opportunities in this space. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel. Rachel was a last minute fill-in for one of our speakers who could not make it. So thanks for taking the time to put this together quickly and giving us an overview of state programs. As a reminder, everybody who has questions, etc., comments, programs, activities that they'd like to share, please put those in Slido. And I'm going to just begin going down the list of questions. So Michaela says, I'm a second-year PhD student interested in science policy after graduate school. What should I start doing now to prepare for a career in science policy? So anybody want to take that?
I can start. So I would say there's a few things. I would start by looking if there's a group of people that already are interested in science policy at your institution. If there isn't, you can always start one. It's can be quite challenging, but I am sure there's people that are interested in science policy just like you are. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. I feel like there's a lot out there of things that you can do and things that you can get involved. And I think I see that in the Slido, there's a lot of like resources already. And I feel like those scientific societies and organizations have a lot of tips of what to do. And I also think that you're still a PhD student, and most of us are also PhD student, and there'll be time for science policy as a full-time job. But I think, I think just starting and showing interest and that interest in being sustained over the years during your PhD is the most important part as well.
Something else I might mention, I got into science policy through higher ed policy. And so for graduate students, I think if there's opportunities on your campus to get involved in education advocacy through like your graduate student senate or something like that, it's a great pathway to learn about how the policymaking process works to begin with and get some lawmaker connections and can be a really valuable way to gain experience.
And I'll finally wrap up with communication is a really important tool in science policy. So if you start practicing writing simply about science in a blog, or you could try get things published in various resources, that's also a good way to prepare for a life in science policy.
Yeah, and just to add a few more, I always say it's good to have a skill base. So if you're able to take classes, even if it's not for a grade, even if you're just auditing in things like program evaluation, policy analysis, if you're interested in a particular field like environmental policy or energy policy or health policy, if there's classes, be sure to take them. You can always do skills through My Academy. NSPN has a lot of free resources, where you can also learn a lot of skills and do some content. But getting involved is the most important thing. So volunteer organizations that are related to whatever your passion is, whether it be a disciplinary society or whether it's as some sort of non-governmental organization, those are really good ways to kind of get to know and meet people who actually work in public policy. And if your society has a day in Washington Day, that I just got one myself with the Society of Women Engineers in a few weeks, you should definitely participate in that. So the more real world experience you get, the better, and the more skills you get and education you get, the better. This is, what are your favorite tools to keep track of the actual science policy being enacted in real time? How do you track new legislation of interest? For that one, somebody mentioned like FYI from the American Institute of Physics. That's one of my favorite ones. AAAS, in science, they have I think Toby mentioned it. Yeah, Science Insider Online. That's really good. And I would say even, like Twitter, there's a whole bunch of people who are involved in science and technology policy. So the organization that Toby manages, along with Aaron Heath at AAAS, which is engaging scientists, engineers, and policy. They also post jobs. and fellowships and that's Twitter at SciPol Jobs. So those are really good ways to kind of keep track of what's happening. But I think, and also I should say nature also is really good, particularly if you're international. Nature is better, in my opinion, than science on a lot of policy issues in terms of, their coverage worldwide.
Debbie, there's another organization, if you happen to be interested in space policy, there's a wonderful website, Space Policy Online. It's fantastic. It's set up by Marcia K. Smith, who was a long-term person in this, and she also tweets. And if you look at the space policy people, you'll find there various of the policy publications that come out of the space industry, the aerospace industry. When there's a big committee meeting, oftentimes the reporters will be there and Marcia Smith will be there, and they'll be tweeting comments from the report. So even if you can't get into the report or you want to see it later on, you can read, and they will tweet out the important things that are happening.
Great, thanks. Melinda has also kindly posted a bunch of useful resources. Those are all good. On my webpage, I also am constantly developing a resource list. And as I mentioned, if you go to the scitechpolicyacademy.com, if you go to the YouTube page, I, like monthly have webinars. So I did already one on federal resumes, on fellowship and job opportunities beyond AAAS. And then this month I'm working on one that's policy jobs that are not in government, science technology policy jobs that are not in government. So I already have like 2 speakers for that. As soon as I get the next couple lined up, that will be there. So sign up for my email list, and those are all free webinars. Do you have any recommendations on systematically evaluating the success of programs to help scientists engage in policy? What have you learned through evaluations? Anybody want to take that one? I'll just say that, for example, the foundations who fund a lot of these programs are very much interested in evaluations. I can just personally, because I've been involved with this in decades, I was the founding director for the Resiam program, so I ran it for its first 10 years. And I can definitely tell you that, if you're interested in science technology policy, there's definitely a career path for you. One challenge, though, is that, as there are more and more AAAS S&T policy fellows that are sort of graduating, there's more people like on the market. And that's why it's really important. This is the AAAS workshop we did last year, is to understand that there's more scientists, engineers employed in state government than there is in federal government. So sometimes I think that people don't understand, and I myself started in state government in terms of working for the state of Texas, which is where my family lives, is that sometimes people don't really understand that science technology policy is like everywhere. And it's not just there. Another good organization, which I don't think has been mentioned so far, is ESOL. That's about engaging scientists, engineers at the state and local level, ESAL.org, I think. And maybe somebody can look at it. Oh, we have a 5-minute warning here. Let's see here. Yeah, so on international options, there are actually things like the AAAS policy fellowships in other countries. So you can look for those, and the EU also has some fellowships. So you just need to, really talk to people in whatever country that you're interested in. And I always say be entrepreneurial. I've seen people like just go out and approach a policymaker and say, hey, I'd like to get some experience, and do it that way. Let's see here. Let me see, we have some things. So Rachel, this is for you. Do most of these state programs welcome applications from out of state?
Sure, really briefly, and I answered this in the chat. Most states do allow out-of-state applicants to apply. I know in Missouri, we at least look for, some effort into understanding our state and showing interest in the state of Missouri. I think Virginia and Texas may be the only 2 states that don't allow out-of-state applicants at this time.
Okay. Then we have another question, which is, would you all speak to the role that scientific societies, associations can help can play in helping researchers at any career stage learn about policy opportunities? Anybody want to answer that one? Uh, I think, for if somebody's working at uh, a policy, a disciplinary society and things like that, the first is to honor those people who are interested in going into policy and don't like tell them they're not really a real scientist because they want to go into policy. That happens far too often, even today, based on the feedback I get from my students. And then I think the other option is doing, like webinars and things like that that are specific about policy in their field. I think the best organization, as far as I know, that's a model for this is American Geophysical Union. They really have a great set of resources in terms of communication. My main issue sometimes with the disciplinary societies is they focus too much on what's called, policy for science, like just getting more funding for research and too little on science for policy. Being an engineer, I always say science and technology for policy. And I think that's a mistake that many organizations make is not showing, okay, here's how, what we do and information we provide, not just research, but all knowledge is useful for things like a pandemic.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, totally agree with that. And if you go to your society, look for that area that maybe says policy or says advocacy, and you can learn about some of the things that they're doing. So just go to your society and check what are some of the efforts that they have going on.
Okay, so I think we're going to be running out of time. I think a lot of these questions were answered. Oh, well, let's do this. Another one from Amanda here which is, should we focus on a specific science policy area for post-grad paths? My background is in plants, and I had USDA internships, but interested in others too. I would. There's absolutely no field restrictions. Like when I ran the Resign program, people would start to tell me, and this happens a lot actually, about the dissertation. I said, look, I don't care. I really do not care about whatever your dissertation is on. What I really care is how much you really care about the policy issue without being an advocate. Because in Washington, being policy neutral is important. Rachel, do you want to say a bit more about that?
I was going to say the exact same thing, Debbie. I think that, in a fellowship position, especially, you're going to get asked to cover topics way outside of your comfort zone. And so being able to have, some sort of understanding of a particular topic area, but be willing to be flexible about how you can apply those skills to other topic areas is really important.
Are there resources for getting involved with education policy? I'm currently a postdoc scholar at a STEM Education Institute. Yeah, actually, I would say out of all the areas, STEM education is one where there seems to always be a good number of opportunities. I think it's really important to be involved with the National Science Teacher Association. Then there's also an association focused on engineering education. If you come from that world, if you're doing K through 12, there's also work for an undergraduate and graduate education, like where Toby is, who's on here, Toby Smith, which is the Association of American Universities, and the APLU, which is Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. They change their name, so I always forget what it is. And it's something where I did an actual analysis looking at all the different advisory committees at the state level, and they're almost all entirely on STEM education. So there's a lot out there, like at the state level, that you might not be aware of. Let's see here. So I think, hopefully I did not miss anybody, but we're out of time anyhow. So let's just get a final thought from each of our speakers. So why don't we start with Amanda?
I would say, especially also to the most recent question, that we are trained to do research. And so we are good at consuming lots of information and then coming to a consensus. So definitely move outside your field if you are moved to, and you will be successful. And it's an exciting time to go into science policy. And again, please reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, Bernat?
Echo what Amanda just said. Just remember that you don't have to do this alone. This path of learning about science policy. Science policy is a lot about collaboration and work with other people. So find a group of people and a community that is as passionate as you are in science policy, and I'm sure that the ideas and the progress will go right on. So,
Rachel?
Sure, and I would say, any science policy career is going to always be a teaching and learning experience. You bring expertise to the room, but are also going to be surrounded by really smart people who are experts in whatever they're doing. And so remember that you do have a valuable background as a scientist or engineer coming into those positions, but that you also have the opportunity to learn from all the other expertise of people who work in this field.
And I think that one's really important, Rachel. That's one of the things that people overlook is they tend to, a very common sort of myth is that if we bring the science and the technical knowledge, they will come and believe and change their ways. But it's really more the opposite way. We need, as scientists, engineers, and health professionals, to understand more what the public thinks and not be scared to talk to them. And that's, I think, really important. Joan, do you want to say something?
I agree with everything that people have said. I've seen science policy from inside an agency, and those of the people that are inside an agency are not allowed to advocate in the way and to speak out in the way that you outside the agency are able to do that. And I can tell you from firsthand knowledge that your voices make a big difference. And when you interact with the people inside the agency, it's very important because that gives them a window into what the public is thinking. Oftentimes we're in a glass fishbowl. Everybody's looking at us and we can't see out, unfortunately. So please keep that two-way communication going.
And I'll just give you an amusing story from my days in government. One of my favorite things to do at AAAS meetings was when they had the questions that you could do on cards. And because I could be anonymous, I could ask really tough questions of the speakers that I could never ever stand up and do because I was too recognizable for from the institutions that I worked for. So that I just want to emphasize Joan's point that understand that it's you have to really be like very neutral when you work and other things. So thank you all for coming. You'll see on this last slide my email address and also Twitter. So if there's any question that I apologize for somehow missing in all the activities that were going on, please be sure to reach out. In fact, Twitter is often, I think, the best way because I can connect you with people to add any sort of questions. So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy the rest of AAAS annual meeting. Bye-bye.